Hello, everyone. This is what your pastor and tell you. I can't even say my name right.
Oh,
We
awesome.
have Kipp Davis with us here. We're going to be talking about his book, God's Propaganda, pulling back the curtain on what the Bible wants you to see. And what's interesting about this book is that I read the whole thing, and I didn't even think a lot of it was that controversial. A lot of the stuff was just basic stuff that even conservative scholars would say. So um, don't let
That's what was interesting about it, was that it's not controversial.
well there was. That's it. Exactly. That's it. That is the only thing that was
I'm
interesting.
just,
Yeah.
I'm sitting here. I'm like, is it because you were expecting me to say something or write something controversial?
Well, so Dan
Uh,
McClellan, he does his video, his book, and the whole
yeah.
thing is like controversial stuff. And then you have this, which says,
Wow.
it's got the the logo or whatever whatever
Yeah,
it is,
yeah.
which is a super controversial
The
topic. So yeah, I thought it was going to be super
oh,
controversial.
I tried to do. I mean, I thought. I mean, I think I said some things that are not uh altogether I feel like there are times within the book that I am definitely not within the mainstream of scholarship on some
Hmm.
thing but I guess, well, that's now honestly, I feel a little bit bad that I didn't say anything controversial.
You
But I
didn't say
often
enough
tell people,
controversial things. Yeah.
okay. I often tell people though too, because I think they get this impression of me, but I often feel like I have to remind people in my audience that insofar as my scholarship goes, it's pretty
Mhm.
conservative. As a, I mean, I think within the field, lots of it's pretty conservative. I mean, you know, I'm not the guy out there going, David was a fictional character. Um, I'm not even the one out there going, Moses definitely didn't exist. That's not me. Or, the entire Bible was written in the Persian period. So it yeah, it feels like most of my stuff is pretty mainstream. So
Yeah.
anyways,
But does McClellan's book have metal lyrics? Did you have metal lyrics in the
no.
book?
Oh, did you, yeah, on chapter 7,
Oh, I must
the
have missed that.
very beginning, you just gloss right over
I
it.
only read it once, okay?
Uh,
Gosh, it was a
oh,
big
yeah,
book,
okay. It's
a
a
lot to
big book
remember.
and, easy to forget a lot of things in there, no doubt, but, yeah, the song Skyforger by Amorphous, which is a Finnish death metal band. I opened the chapter with that in talking about cosmic geography. And that's actually one of the two chapters. See, it's interesting to me that you would have forgotten that one because that's one of the two chapters I believe were actually quoted your favorite scholar, John Walton.
Oh, look at that.
So look at that, right? But yeah,
You're on your way to Christianity. How great.
that must be it.
Yeah, that's mostly it. All right, so let's get into the book. So,
Okay.
actually, I should have asked you this already here. Could you just give people just a really, 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 really quick overview of what you talk about in the book?
So the book is okay. So the book was drawn from a course that I used to teach in university, a second year course called Israelite Religions, and it's divided. Each chapter is dedicated to aspects of the religious and cultural institutions of ancient Israel within the Iron Age, and I think it follows a loose chronological progression as well, where I try to deal with like the early things early, so stuff with regards to settlement and cultural backgrounds and those sorts of things appear closer to the beginning. Um, my chapter on apocalypticism is right at the end. But it's really a book that's uh I think telling the story of Israelite cultural origins mixed in with a little bit of the history of biblical scholarship as well, and other things that I just find really interesting. Um, I mean, it's one of the things we'll probably talk about today, and something that I sort of wove through the book. Um, is this idea about how much I think the Hebrew Bible is informed. It's a book, by and large, about the Bible and the way that the Bible is negotiating with it with the real things that happened in Israel's history and culture. But I like the idea that one of the guiding principles I see throughout a lot of the biblical texts is this contrast between sort of these idyllic highland cultures in contrast to what they perceive as like urban decadence and um, a a lifestyle that is contrary to what they would view as um, idyllic. Sorry, what was that an okay summary?
No, I think
Kinda went all over
that's
there.
a pretty good there. So you get into a lot of different topics. You get into the sons of God. So some of it overlap with what Heiser said. You mentioned you talked about you cited from John Walton. Some of the stuff was just very basic on the ground Israelite stuff. So like you talked about the type of home an Israelite might have lived in, or the what we'll talk about today, where they're surrounded by all of these empires, or empires came before, and then Israelite culture was very different, and that played an impact on how they, I guess, propagated or I guess did well, at least for a time. And that kind of explains what we see in the biblical text, and um, just how they interacted with other cultures throughout. So a lot of different topics and talked about Genesis. But yeah, it was a really interesting book, and not exactly what I
Thanks.
expected, but I still found it really
Oh,
helpful and fascinating.
well, that's good, thank you.
Sure.
I appreciate that. So,
Yeah.
I appreciate that you managed to get all the way through it, because I have discovered it's a big book. I mean, I knew that in when I went into this, but yeah, it takes time to get through it.
Yeah,
So,
that is true. So in your book, you talk
yeah.
about how before Israel comes to power, near the very end of the Bronze Age, and right before the Iron Age, so around say 1200 BCE or somewhere around there, right?
Mhm.
You say that the ancient Near East is dominated by empires like Egypt, Hittites, the Babylonians, Assyria. So before I even came to this book, I'm wondering, what is even an empire to begin with? So how do we even know what to compare it to? What is an empire?
Yeah, and I probably don't spend enough time actually pondering that question or focusing in on what that looks like within this context. But I think the period in question is generally regarded, discussed by scholars as almost a golden age for the Mediterranean. I've heard it described by some as comparable to almost like an ancient form of like modern globalization. The thing that really characterizes the region for probably a 300-year period from around the 15th century BCE through the 13th or the 12th century BCE in the Mediterranean is this widespread trade and diplomatic interaction. There's a lot of movement and trafficking of goods all over the place, and this makes these various larger regions particularly wealthy. Those, the pharaohs in Egypt and the Hittites in the north and the Mycenaeans and Mitanni and this really helps to just increase their wealth. And along with that, there's an explosion of culture as well. So these larger empires, those individual groups that are involved in this trade network are also expanding their own territory. And I mean, that's what we see really when it comes to the region of Canaan or Palestine, in the 13th, uh in like the 14th, 13th, 12th century, is particular competition between Egypt in the south and the Hittite Empire, the Anatolians in the north, and the Turkey area, as they are vying for control of this entire terrestrial corridor that basically connects them, but also connects Egypt to Assyria and Mesopotamia in the north, and then the southeast. So, excuse me. Um, at the time, Egypt is sort of they're the ones who had control of Canaan, starting. I believe it was Tutmosis the second or the third in the 15th century, who really expanded and took control of that area. And then it was after another 150 years or so, that the Egyptians, Ramses II in particular, met the Hittites on the battlefield in Carchemish, and they fought to a draw, essentially. Oh, look, it's a map that I drew. Um, so they fought to a draw here, and signed. It, it might be. I think I'm not entirely sure. It might be our oldest example of an actual, um, like a treaty between these regions, which guaranteed them certain rights and trade responsibilities in exchange for an understanding of the boundaries in the area. So um, yeah, it yeah. So I guess to answer your question there about empires, it's really these rich, powerful kingdoms that control larger areas, smaller kingdoms, smaller city states, and are in deeply involved in these trade networks.
Much appreciated. Yeah.
I
So,
it has two maps and two pictures,
oh shoot,
and
that's
I drew them all.
wow. That's worth a copy in and of itself.
There you go.
Two maps and two pictures. No, there's more than that. But yep. So you'll see at the top Anatolia in the very non-bolded font there. I guess it's just your writing. And then you have Egypt at the kind of the bottom left there, and then Assyria is kind of at the top right, and then you have Israel kind of in the middle. Eventually, I guess.
Yeah.
But yes, so I want people to just have a picture of what they can visualize in their head. So,
Ca can you
yep.
put the map back up? Because
Okay.
I feel something else is worth explanation here.
Okay.
You'll notice too, the reason why this little strip of land here is as important as it is. And Jerusalem's interesting because it's the city of Jerusalem itself is actually not not on the coastal plain, which is where most of the traffic up and down between, like the foot traffic up and down from the north to the south would have taken place. But the reason why this was such a critical uh, territory is because you can see right to the east there of Jerusalem. It looks super tiny. Is the Dead Sea and the Jordan River that drains from the Kinnereth, otherwise known as the Sea of Galilee, much later. Um, so, but to the east of that is like this precipitous um, uh, set of cliffs. The Jordan River Valley is the lowest spot on Earth. It's like 300 meters below sea level. It's pretty crazy. So there's this massive ridge that just runs all the way up and down on the east side of the river, and then beyond that, to the east of that, is just an untracked desert, a wilderness. It was virtually impassable. You couldn't you couldn't go as the crow flies from Jerusalem to Babylon, or from Egypt straight over to Babylon, because you would die. There's nothing out there. So the only way to get there was to go north and then to follow the Euphrates down into the south. So it really was, in many respects, Egypt really was kind of isolated from these other powers, which is part of what made this terrestrial land bridge so important, and why they worked pretty hard to control it for a while.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And is this kind of what you were describing there?
Hmm. Yes, you can see on the right side. I've tried to I've tried to illustrate what this looks like. Right there, you have the Dead Sea sort of in the middle of the picture, and it's in this low point of what's called the Rift Valley, which actually extends all the way from up in southern Turkey, northern Syria, down south here, and the Transjordanian plateau there on the east side is, yeah, this precipitous ridge. If you ever go to Israel, one of the things that makes a big impression on people, it certainly made a big impression on me the first time I did it, was driving from Jerusalem down to uh the Dead Sea, to Jericho and Qumran and Matzah on the southern end. The distance from Jerusalem to Jericho is only about 20 to 25 kilometers. Um that would be, what would that be for your American audience? That's like I don't know, 40 miles? No, sorry, way less than that. That's like I'm going in the other direction. It's like 15 miles, I'm guessing, thereabouts. So it's not that far. Like you could walk it you could walk it in a day. It'd be a full day, but it was something that people were able to do in the span of a single day. But in that 25-kilometer distance, when you leave Jerusalem and you start driving into the Jordan Valley down towards the Dead Sea, you just drop. You just start going down and down and down and down, and it feels like almost an endless descent from Jerusalem down to the base of the Dead Sea. And in that short space as well, it can be fairly cool in the city of Jerusalem, but you get down to the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea and Qumran and Jericho, and it's the temperature will increase, 10 degrees sometimes. It's it's dramatic. It makes a big impression.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so got a little fun drawings in there for you guys. But so you talked about how the Israelites were, or when the Israelites come onto the scene, supposedly, during the time of Moses, that even though you don't really say like, hey, this is when Moses says it, but of course, but anyways, so according to say that when the Bible comes along, when Moses comes on the scene, when Israel as a nation comes onto the scene, uh, or even from archaeologically speaking, whenever the Israelites really show up, that it's previous times is just a bunch of empires kind of being in control, and then Israel comes along and they are not really that at all. So we're going to talk about that, but that's important to understand the contrast there. And then you talk about in your book the land of Canaan, what that type of situation looked like at the very end of the Bronze Age. So you also talk about how during Israel's rise to prominence, Canaan itself is a loosely organized confederacy of independent cities. So can you tell us more about what you mean by that, and how that compares with empires?
Yeah, so I think the best way to explain this is to try and understand it historically. Um, there's a very good book by um um shoot, why can't I think of the Eric Klein's
Hmm.
called 1177 BC, which goes provides a really nice accessible account of what happened at the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of of the Iron Age, what scholars will often refer to as the Bronze Age collapse, within a 150 year period, from 1300 to about 1100 BCE. A series of things occur which dramatically change the face of the Mediterranean, just in terms of its social and cultural, social stratification and cultural and demographic outlook. So uh, there's a series of droughts and crop failures that occur in this period. Um, there's some tension that's also increasing in the particular region known as Canaan, which at the time of Ramses II, which is regarded as sort of the high point of Egyptian culture and control in Canaan. You start to it's after that you start to see more internal tension and um just conflict amongst the people who are living in the area of Canaan there. At this same time, the entire Anatolian Empire just collapses. Like it's gone. The Mycenaean Empire crumbles. The empire of Mitanni is gone. It's like this erosion and deconstruction of these imperial powers that's the result of environmental, economic, cultural forces, things that are not necessarily within anybody's control. And as a result, what ends up replacing this, one of the scholars I'm quite fond of is Christian Frevel, who wrote a very good history of ancient Israel, um, from a strong material culture archaeological perspective, and he likens a lot of what's happening in this period to ebbs and flows between urbanization and deurbanization. So if you think about like the emergence of the great empires as coinciding kind of with this period of urbanization within Canaan as well. It's the end of this. the result of this collapse of imperial powers, then also results or is in part caused by this deurbanization, this movement of people away from these urban centers, and that's really what we see happening here in the region. Is a lot of these cities are destroyed, they're abandoned. There's a massive increase in these highland village settlements. Most of the cities are along the coastal plain there, along the coast, which makes sense. That's where the traffic is, the imperial traffic between the Hittites and the Egyptians and the Assyrians. So that's where you build your cities. There's a gradual um shift in the demographics as these cities are destroyed or just abandoned, and a huge increase of settlements in the hill country, the highlands, especially in what we call the highlands of Ephraim, which stretch from about Mount Carmel there down south, just past Samaria, and the highlands of Judah, which are stretched beyond those and down to Jerusalem. So you see a huge increase of these village settlements. Prior to that, the area, as I mentioned, was under Egyptian control, but it was dominated by these, as near as we can tell, independent Canaanite cities. Uh, they range. Most of them are not very big. They're pretty small. On average, I think Frevel says that on average, the Canaanite cities at the end of the Bronze Age were about 2 hectares. You've got some gigantic cities. There's a huge city up in the north, uh, out just even past the territory of Israel, called Chatzor, which was 80 hectares. The largest city by far in the region of Canaan. In the south, the city of Lachish was probably the second largest city in the region. Not, no, we can talk about the Philistines in a little bit, but excluding the Philistine Pentapolis of Gaza, Ashkelon, um, Gath. I'm forgetting the other two. The five Canaanite cities. Those are also quite large. But beyond that, Lachish is kind of the next largest city in the south, and it's only 7 hectares. The rest of these cities are pretty small, most around two hectares, most able to support about 1,500 to 2,000 people, and they start to lots of them are destroyed and abandoned, as I said. Um, oh, sorry, no, I was talking. Yeah, I was talking about what this looked like before that. Um, so there, each individual city is controlled by a king and like a ruling family, somebody who um wields the most money and power. There's a temple establishment, as near as we can tell, in every city, which supported a priesthood, and they were generally independent. While they were vassals of Egypt, they maintained their own culture and their own traditions. They seem to have regarded themselves as independent and clearly not Egyptian, but then also not Canaanite. They were self-sustaining and self-reliant. We see some examples though of there was a lot of competition and conflict just within the area itself between the individual cities. Um, and there are times when there's external threats that come into the region when they would band together and fight as a collective to repel external threats. This is actually what you see when Tutmosis III is increasing his influence and basically conquering and taking over the region in the 13 and the 1400s. A number of these Canaanite cities actually band together and fight together as a coalition to repel the Egyptians unsuccessfully. But this is kind of the way that they exist with one another. They form these trade networks, but they're not beyond squabbling with one another. And there's occasional military actions taken between them.
Appreciate that. So, yeah, just to highlight, so they were independent cities, but they were collectively interested. So they would coordinate some of
They had to
the
be, yeah.
right, right. Um,
It feels
so
like my impression is, sorry to interrupt, but my impression is that it's kind of a last resort almost from
yeah,
from their perspective. It's the
mm,
same way you might when you're growing up, um I don't know if you have any siblings, but when you're growing up, uh you sometimes feel like your brother is you you're I don't know about your worst enemy, but you're, you know, the not your favorite person, and you're in constant competition with them or trying to get
mm,
one over them. But then, if somebody from the outside threatens your family or threatens your siblings,
mm,
you're right there to support each other,
mm.
you know. So
Yeah. Yeah, and something also you mentioned, you said, so they would have a city king, which would provide protection to the residents, and in turn, they would produce goods and services in an urban marketplace. And this meant that while the Canaanite city-states maintained their autonomy, they were also heavily dependent on trade with surrounding farmers and pastoral nomads. So people living outside
yeah,
the city. And
yeah.
that's really interesting picture as far as the culture and going into town to sell my sheep, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is, so as near as, this is not my own area of expertise, but on the
Mm,
basis of the stuff that I've read, it does seem that, most of the peasantry are actually the ones who lived in the cities and closest to the cities, and, those who did live outside of the cities, leading up to this transition, certainly tended
mm,
to be more wealthy landowners and farmers,
mm,
right? And I think that's kind of interesting too,
yeah.
if we're imagining the emergence of Israel out of this transition to a highland culture. It's an it's a movement of people out of the cities, certainly, which means an increase of, some of this peasantry into these regions outside, which are also already partly settled, right, by these more wealthy landowners.
Hmm. Yeah. So then we have the Merneptah stele, and
Hmm.
this is a very cool thing. So it's Egyptian,
It is a
and
cool thing.
it is a cool thing. Got some cool pictures at the top here, and if I can get this thing to work, gosh darn it. Um, yeah. So we got a nice little picture there, and this was, I guess it was created in 1208 BCE. So pretty much near the end of the Bronze Age there, and it has Israel on it. So that's really interesting. It mentions Israel. It's our
The
clearest
first clear mention.
right,
Yeah.
right.
So
And what
earliest.
is this? What does this tell us about the Israel? I guess as a concept, as a group. How much does this tell us about what Israel was at this time?
Uh, very little, actually.
Okay.
There are some things I think a lot when scholars talk about the Merneptah stele, and one of the things that they draw a lot of attention to is to the fact. So it's a I mean I provide a translation of it in the book here, and it might just be easiest to
Yeah.
read it.
Yeah. Actually, I'd prefer if you could read in Egyptian.
I can't. I would
Mhm.
prefer it to, but sadly, that is beyond me.
Okay.
So let's see. Um, and I think my translation here is drawn from Klein's. I can check, but I'm pretty sure that's who it is. So, um,
You want me to read it?
uh, I got it. I was just checking to see who the translation is. It's oh no, it's
William
Miriam
Hallow.
Lichtheim's. Oh yeah, it's Miriam Lichtheim's. So um this is commemorating Merneptah. Egypt at the time of Merneptah was invaded by Libya, and so he had to go and look after that. And then at the same time, on the other side, he was experiencing direct conflict and threats from the sea people who had been starting to settle along the coast there of the Mediterranean. So he went on a campaign into Palestine, and he erected this monument outlining his victories and his success. And in the section in question where Israel is mentioned, it says this. This is from lines 26 to 28. It says the chieftains lie prostrate, saying, "Peace." Not one lifts his head among the 9 bows. Libya is captured, while Hatti is pacified. The Canaan is plundered. Ascalon is carried off, and Gezer is captured. Am is made into non-existence. Israel is wasted, its seed is not, and Huru is become a widow of Egypt. So that is it. That's the all of it that we've got about Israel from 1208 BCE. One of the things that scholars have pointed out that's particularly interesting with this inscription is that in Egyptian, the each of these locales that's mentioned, Libya and Hatti and Ascalon and are all designated with a particle or a marker that sets them out as specific place names as territories, and that's missing from the mention of Israel. And it's been widely interpreted by scholars as indicating that Israel at this point in time is seems to be understood not necessarily as a specific place or even a specific people group, but more as like a class of individuals or a type which there's a lot of there's a lot of, I'd say, information, uh secondary data, largely drawing from the biblical text, which seems to preserve this idea that there was this period of time in Israel's collective memory in the past when they didn't have a settled identity and a place. I mean, we know famously the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as the patriarchs who were, effectively nomads wandering around in the land and moving from place to place. The word itself, Hebrew, is drawn from a root, which means to cross over or to pass through. Most scholars will point to this as you know indicative. These are the people who pass through or wander around or who cross over, right? The Ibri. Um, and then even within some of their own traditions, uh forged into myths. Um, I'm thinking in particular, like within the Exodus stories. Um, One of the things that I see in there, which is quite interesting, is also um in the root of this term for Levi. Um, this word itself also means like attached to or coming. There's this idea of a people that comes from outside, that's kind of wandering around, that's uh not under some sort of centralized control or authority. um, you might get that same impression from the way that Israel is described on the Renepta Stele, that this isn't a city state in the same way that Ascalon is. It's not a people group in the same way that Hati is. It's something else. It's more loosely connected. It's more maybe socially stratified.
That's really interesting. And just for clarity there, so you kind of come to that conclusion because these other city states have a distinction, I think in the book you call it a glyph, and
Yeah.
Israel does not.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's fascinating. So you also talk about
I
what were
should
you gonna say?
point out though,
Okay.
like all of this stuff too, I should point out that there's not universal agreement about a lot of these things, right? I know that there's lots of, and I don't talk about this in the book um at all, but there are certainly challenges to the general explanation of the Merneptah Stela. Scholars have suggested that this maybe is not as significant as some scholars think it is. I know that there are even scholars who challenge the existence of the name Israel on the Merneptah Stele, although that's a very very small minority. I think it's pretty widely accepted that this is definitely the word, the name. When it comes to names, especially from one culture or one language to another one, a lot of this gets really can get really complicated.
Just real quick, don't spend too much time on this, but do you
Mhm.
believe the Hebrew comes from Hebrew?
No, as I mentioned, I think the stronger connection, the most likely connection is to the verbal root um,
Mhm.
uh, avar, which is a Hebrew word meaning to cross over, to pass through. And this is where a lot of I think a lot of the current scholarship now will suggest that while the terms are really really close to one another, um, there is no clear direct relationship between them. There is the possibility that at a later point in time, the sound similarity was something that was picked up by later writers and sort of capitalized on. I tend to prefer I quite like Anson Rainey's who the Apiru were um itself is not a settled matter. I tend to favor Anson Rainey's explanation for these people. The term itself, we know it from the Amarna letters, which come from about 100 years before the Bronze Age collapse, and they describe these are letters between the pharaohs and their Canaanite vassals. They're really really interesting because they are written um, in in uh, uh, in like a Canaanite language, very very similar to Hebrew, but using like these 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 cuneiform symbols and stuff, right? So it's which is really cool. But most a lot of the letters uh are focused on complaining about um these invasions or these disruptions by this group of people identified as the Haperu. Um the other interesting thing about a lot of the Amarna letters is that when the Canaanite kings are complaining about the Apiru coming in and causing all sorts of problems with their particular city, and so they're reaching out to the pharaoh to send reinforcements, right, to help them out, to help repel the Apiru, who are endangering the city. But then a lot of the other times, these city kings are then complaining about each other. They're complaining about you know the king in Jerusalem's complaining about the king in Shechem, and how he is being disloyal to the pharaoh, and he himself is aligning himself with the Apiru, and he is an Apiru. And the really interesting thing is that these individual kings will make this complaint about each other. So it does seem that this is the term itself was probably a derogatory term. It seems like it probably was reflective of a group of people, a large group of people, um, who might have been distinguished as formerly part of the Egyptian armed forces, part of the army, who have at some point in time become disloyal to the pharaoh. It's almost a way for these Canaanite rulers to complain to the pharaoh about people they see as being disloyal to the pharaoh, which is why they level the charge at one another. It's why they talk about people who are in the area, who are causing trouble for them. So I think it's complicated. I think it's unclear as to who the Apidu were. I don't, and it just kind of muddies the waters a fair bit in terms of understanding even what's happening a lot of the times. That's certainly relative to the biblical stories of what happened at the end of the Bronze Age.
Yeah. And no matter how many super, 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 super conservative uh, archaeologists say, is not good reason to think that the Hapiru were the Israelites or evidence of the Israelites early on.
Yeah. No, I think too, understanding who the Israelites were, and this is also where the majority of scholarship is settled. Um, so we know that there's someone there in 1202, 1208, when Merneptah erected his stele, that used this identifier, Israel. Either they used it themselves or it was applied to them by the pharaoh. Um, but who scholars by and large agree that this is a group that emerged from within Canaan. This was the product of what happened as these city states started to crumble, as the imperial age started to deteriorate. What was left in Canaan was kind of a vacuum. Merneptah was sort of the last one to wield any real Egyptian power in the region after Merneptah. There, Egypt is kind of pushed back to their own traditional boundary, and there's a power vacuum, and what eventually fills that is not just this new kingdom, Israel, but a series, a grouping of kingdoms. This is where you see the emergence of Moab and Edom and Aram, um, all out of the destruction that and change that occurs over this period of hundreds of years. So the Israelites are Canaanites in the same way that everybody else in the area is Canaanites. The Moabites were Canaanites, and the Edomites were Canaanites, and all of these groups were Canaanites that became forged into these later smaller states. Um, so yeah. So yeah, that's kind of where that comes from. Some of this coincides too with this transition from uh urban culture into these village settlements. There's an increase in rural life with the deterioration of the imperial powers and these city states in Canaan at the end of the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age. I think something that's important to point out that a lot of people tend to miss, because people will look at this as like all the cities were destroyed and they were abandoned, and everybody then was just living in these highland villages, and that's not what happened. I mean, there's lots of displacement and lots of movement and lots of transition out of predominantly these city states into more so these highland settlements, but there's still, lots of these cities still survive well into the Iron Age. They don't all disappear, and there's this continuity of Canaanite culture that's never really interrupted at any point in this period of transition either. So Israel kind of emerges out of this, but quite a bit later, and it's never clear, at least from like a strictly archaeological perspective, when that is. We know it's happened by the time of like the 9th century, which is where you have the first archaeological evidence of like states in Israel, and probably Judah as well. But prior to that, there's this period of time uh, at which this village culture eventually becomes these later states.
That's really interesting. So, uh, so you have all these empires kind of being in control, and then in the land where Israel eventually would show up in Canaan, you have all these kind of independent city states, and then all of a sudden you have the Bronze Age collapse, where these empires are
All of a
all,
sudden being like a period of about 200 years. So
yeah,
yeah,
okay,
I
yeah,
mean, I guess on an
all of a sudden,
evolutionary
yeah,
perspective, it's pretty sudden. But yeah, but it no, you're not wrong. Sorry.
yeah.
It just yeah,
um, it's funny because the way things are described in a lot of these documentaries, it does seem all of a sudden, at least.
it
So I,
does.
I do appreciate you
Uh,
mentioning that.
And one of the reasons for that is because it's not, we like simple, clean answers to lots of
Yeah.
these questions, right? But it just so often, like, history is not like that. It's really messy. Like, you've got well, I mean, even maybe let me if I can uh just read uh something here which I think um,
I'll allow it.
puts it into into a nice perspective. If I can find it here, I think. Yeah, here. So here's the way that Christian Frevel describes it, right? He says the collapse of the late Bronze Age urban culture did not occur in one fell swoop, but in a process of continuous decline that lasted from the 15th century through the 12th centuries BCE and culminated in the transition to the Iron One period. It's important to understand that this process did not affect exclusively the southern Levant, but the entire Mediterranean region. Like we do also too, right? We set our focus on just this area because we're really culturally, religiously fascinated by Israel. We tend to forget or just not know that yeah, like this was happening in all sorts of places around the Mediterranean, right? At the end of the late Bronze Age, Mycenae, Knossos, Troy, Miletus, Hattusa, sorry, Kition, and Komi, Katna, Aleppo, Alalakh, Ugarit, and many other cities were also destroyed. The Levant entered a phase of upheaval that is equally characterized by collapse, instability, crisis, uprooting, migration, mobility, appropriation, transformation, creolization, hybridization, transculturation, and ethnogenesis. So it's like a whole bunch of things happening all at once, right? These processes should not be evaluated only negatively. For example, as abandonment. They may even be evaluated as a departure towards something new. The tension between continuity and discontinuity, homogeneity and diversity, or stability and dynamic consistently characterizes the changing economic, political, cultural, and social systems. The changes did not take place linearly, but in a multifaceted interaction. They had global and also local aspects and developed in complex, regionally differentiated processes that affected macro, meso, and micro levels. So like the point is that a lot of this we're trying to synthesize a whole bunch of factors right into the simple clean explanations and it just doesn't work. A good example of this I think is when you're evaluating the shift from like this urban culture to a more rural culture when you're evaluating that shift that takes place in like the 13th, 12th, and 11th centuries, what you see in the north, like in what we would call the highlands of Ephraim, is that there's still a lot of interrelationships between the city states. There's an increasing village culture, but there's still a lot of interaction and transference of goods and culture and stuff between the city states that are still there that weren't destroyed, much more so than in the South, where it seems like there's a stronger separation, right, between the village culture and the urban culture. So I mean, that's just one of the ways in which you can see the shift taking place differently and at a over a longer period of time from one place to another, even just in this relatively small region.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, so in other words, you have these empires, and then you have the Bronze Age collapse, and there
Yep.
wasn't actually all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden, you have.
Yeah.
I keep saying that it's funny, but
It's
anyways,
fine. It's
it's a
fine.
phrase. But
Yeah.
so you have this huge population boom, and as you kind of
Yeah.
described, it's not exactly clear how much these are Israelites or
Yeah.
where all this came from. But could you talk about, I guess, how we know that there was a huge population boom and what scholars think about that?
So Scholars will tell us what they generally say is that there is from uh like the 12th to the 11th century in particular, there is this 13th to the 12th century in particular, there is this massive increase of villages in the highland region. An increase of, I think it's figures are like 500%. The population of the highlands in particular kind of explodes. Now, who these people are and where they came from is a more complicated question. Some of this, I think, probably comes from like the people who abandoned these cities that were destroyed went somewhere. I think probably some of this came from there, but also there is a lot of movement into the area as well. Um, I think another natural explanation is that with like the collapse of the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, um, lots of people stayed there, sure, but a lot of these people also just moved on and probably moved into the area from the north. You have the Philistines or the sea people, which we haven't even really talked about, who have been moving into the area already. Prior to Merneptah, I mean, there's already some movement of the sea people into Canaan as early as Ramses. I think there's some mention of that a presence of sea people in the area from time to time. Uh, so and they come from like the Aegean, so sort of like modern day Greece, that part of the world too, right? So there's lots of movement that uh you know results in an increase of people living in the land. As you can imagine, this also contributes to the tension that's already taking place. If you think about empires crumbling and environmental forces and droughts and economic changes all occurring at the same time, it creates this destabilization that then coincides with like a withdrawal of Egypt eventually from the region over a period of time. You can imagine that this just creates a lot of internal conflict and tension. I think, but the point here is that we see a change from this the way that Canaanite looked during this imperial age into a period when there's a lot more people in the area and there's a lot more people congregating in these villages living in the highlands. So it's a much more it's a movement away, as Frevel puts it. This is like a a um a state of de-urbanization, right? It's like a movement out of this urban culture into this more rural culture. And it's I think too, on the basis of what we see just from the material culture, we could maybe even talk about a couple of these things. Well, I mean, well, you wanted to talk about the form room house, but there's a couple of features that archaeologists will look at as features of so-called Israelite culture. One of them is the forum house. You've got another one, which is like the collar rim jar. There is a decrease in what archaeologists would consider luxury items, items of status, and wealth, in these highland villages. And this is interpreted in a number of ways. One of the ways that it's interpreted is that there's a prioritization among these people for something more austere, a plainer way of life, less decadent. Um, and that seems possible to me, but it also is pointed out that this is just part of uh the pragmatic way of living in these new environments. Life in on the frontier, life in these highland villages is in many ways a lot more difficult than it is, living in and around the cities, which are now, crumbling and disappearing in a lot of places. So it's just natural that it's going to reflect that, right? A simpler life is going to lead to things like thrift and resourcefulness and just a concentration on um efficiency and ensuring that there's less waste. Yeah.
Mhm. Thanks for explaining that. And so that's really interesting. So I know that a lot of Christians will say, "Hey, you have this big population boom. Must have been the Israelites," but it's a little more complicated than that, and it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily follow that those Israelites was the same group of supposed people that are mentioned
People that
in the
that
Exodus and
came out
everything.
of Egypt in an Exodus. Yeah, no. Importantly, it doesn't like there's definitely people that are coming into the land, right? But interestingly, it seems like less so from Egypt than from other places. Um, but it's just one factor among a whole bunch. And by and large, I think most scholars are of the fairly strong opinion that Israel uh, came out of Canaan. The way I explained it in a stream I did, was that last week, was that if you think of this in evolutionary or biological terms, you have to think of Canaan and Canaanite as like a clade, and that, you know, Israel and Moab and Edom and less so Philistia. That's more complicated. And Autumn and some of these other places are like um they all come out of this Canaanite clade. They never stop being Canaanites. In the same way that, my Belgian Malinois, who is named Dagon, the abomination of the Philistines, never stopped being a dog. He's just, a species of a dog. So in that same respect, Israel came out of Canaan, but, we're always Canaanites, even though after a period of time, that term, that designator for these people just fell out of use, and they preferred to identify themselves otherwise.
Mhm. Yeah, and we could go into a lot more detail about why scholars think that, but that'll be for another day. So you also talked about how the earliest Israelites were country folk, not city folk. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, what is the reason to think that, and what do those things mean?
Yeah, so this is something that a way of understanding some of the narratives in particular of the Hebrew Bible within this cultural context. I picked this up from Roland Hendel. talks about this, as does David Carr. My friend Joshua Bowen has written about this as well. If you a good example of what I mean by this is if you look at, like, let's say the narrative progression in the first 11 or 12 chapters of the book of Genesis, what you see is a movement away from urbanization and a prioritization or even an idealization of this rural way of life. So, you know, uh, the the so-called Yahwist or non-priestly source of the book of Genesis starts in Genesis chapter 2. It starts in the Garden of Eden, which isn't, like an untampered with natural vista. This is not, like nature out in the forest. This is an urban landscaped garden. It's a manufactured space, right? It's urban. Um, Adam and Eve, are coming out of that and into uh, the the hinterland outside of Eden, and then you have Cain, who's the first murderer, but then he's also the first man to build a city. You have this crisis that takes place in Genesis chapter 11, where um, the all the people of the earth gather together and build a city, and they have to be dispersed once again, right? Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are these wandering nomads who I mean, Abram himself was called out of the city of Ur to wander around in this region far away from Mesopotamia in Canaan. So there's this, it feels like, from the writer's perspective, there is this idealization of country living, of living in the highlands and out of the cities. And you see this reflected in a few other places. In there's a story in the book of Judges, which is also very, very closely related to a story in Genesis, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis. They all sort of feature these same sort of themes where if we think of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which actually starts a chapter earlier in um, Genesis chapter 18, when Abraham encounters uh, three divine beings. And the focus point of this first part of the story is Abraham's hospitality and his generosity to these travelers to look after them. Um, and after, doing so, they reveal to Abram that they are going to these decadent cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they're going to destroy them. Abram negotiates for their rescue, um, and they go there, and then they encounter Lot, who's also put forward as somebody who is, you know, particularly righteous, but then also very, very different from the people that you encounter inside this city. The people who enter the city, they go to the city square, and Lot insists that they come home with him because he perceives that they're in danger just by, you know, being in the city, that they're outsiders in this place, and as a result of that, they can't depend on the kind of hospitality that Abraham, out in the 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 hinterland has provided to them. So there is this, I think, this sort of tension that exists within the texts where there's this idealization of this village culture, this village way of life, this this way of living that contrasts pretty sharply with the cities as being bad, right? This is what we don't want. Um, I think there's kind of a natural, even though I don't believe that like these stories in Genesis were written during the this this transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. I think it comes quite a bit later. I think there's like these traditional elements that you can maybe trace back quite a bit farther to a time when the people who told these stories, this is what they valued, right? They valued this way of life uh, out in um, out in the mountains and away from the cities.
Yeah,
Does
that is
that
really
answer your
interesting.
question?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's
I
really
think
helpful.
it's really interesting, and it's one of my favorite narrative threads of a lot of the texts that are in the Bible.
Mhm.
Um, to be clear, there's not just one, right? I mean, there's hundreds of ways that you can read the texts collectively. And that just happens to be one of my favorites.
Mhm. Yeah, and last time you were on the channel, maybe the second last, whenever you and I talked with
How many
Josh
times
on
have I
Genesis,
been here?
it's been quite a few times. We talked
Oh,
about
wow.
Genesis 1
Okay.
to 11 and
Yeah.
the topics of city and how there seems to be some type of polemical aspect against cities and Babylon, stuff like that. And I think you can
Yeah.
make a pretty convincing case. So that's really interesting when you compare that with how the I guess the formation of Israel itself or the people group uh, seem to be going against that idea already. Um, so yeah, that's fascinating. So then, so we talked about the difference between country folk and city folk, and they most likely didn't really see themselves as city folk. You state in your book that the laws in the Torah prohibit eating of pork because it is unclean, but you also talk about how it might have originated in relation to the Israelites not being city folk. Can you what do you
Yeah.
mean by that?
So, and this I don't know if you have any experience with uh farming. I don't have a lot. I have a little bit. Um and the last job, real job that I had was I was a manager at like a local provincial historic site, which was like there was a farm attached to it, and so we had cows, and we had goats, and smaller livestock too, like chickens and geese and things like that. But we also had pigs, and one of the remarkable things about raising pigs is you don't need a lot of room for them.
Hmm.
You need lots and lots of pasture for cows. Um, you don't need a lot for goats either, but it's better if you've got more room for goats. Pigs, you can keep pigs in much smaller, more compact spaces. One of the things that we see historically, aligns with my own experience, where you do see in this isn't just a feature of the region, but in all sorts of places. One of the things that you see is that pigs are pretty easy to raise in cities. So this is an idea that I picked up from a couple of studies just of in particular to the region, of the demographics of the region, um where it looks like we know that the Philistine cities, the Pentapolis, you see a high amount of pig bones in the archaeological remains there, and much fewer in these highland settlements. And this has led a lot of archaeologists to identify like these settlements as Israelite on this basis. They don't eat pigs. Look, we have these laws in the Torah that say you can't eat pigs. That must be who these people are, and they must have these dietary restrictions already in place. It's probably not so much that as it is, uh, you know, it's a different kind of lifestyle out there in the Highlands. I've presented it in the book as maybe even a feature of living out in the Highlands, a way of distinguishing yourselves from life in the cities. In the cities, they eat a lot of pork. We're not doing that because we're different from them. It's been pointed out to me as well, though, that this might just be uh, a pragmatics, practicality. They just it's just uh, easier to raise goats out in the Highlands than it is pigs. So, um, in any event, I think there seems to be this connection between this new rural lifestyle uh in contrast to the older urban lifestyles of the imperial period of the time of the Canaanite city states, which you can also track on their consumption of and raising of pork. This seems to have been part of that transition for whatever reason. We speculate, right? It doesn't seem to have necessarily been a ritual thing. I think it more likely had to do with the pragmatics of this new lifestyle, and maybe even connected to uh, the social stigma that became attached to um, living in cities as opposed to living out on the land.
That's really interesting. So, one approach might be to say, hey, we have all these cities and places that don't eat pig bones, or maybe I shouldn't say cities, but we have
Yeah,
these places, and it's like, well, is this Israel? Is this somebody else? Maybe it's Israel or it's the Israelites because they don't eat pig bones. We know from the biblical text that they didn't like the pigs. So that's one way to look at it. It's also possible that a group of people were not eating pigs for whatever reason, and then a portion of that group or later people, descendants of that group, ended up being the Israelites. So
yeah.
it is not as if the only people that can uh, stop eating pigs or not eat pigs at all is the Israelites. So there's different possibilities there.
And something that one of the things that we see, and we actually see this right within the biblical text too, is how ritual uh, commemorations and uh, ritual explanations are attached to things that happen. just practically, pragmatically. I talk about this in the first chapter when I talk about how the rationale for the agrarian feasts actually changes over time. And you can actually see that within the biblical text, because what we have are three law codes which outline the feast times for Israel. And then if you set these, you know, in a diachronic order, in a chronological order, you see that the rationale for having these feasts changes over time. Um, you know, the Passover was uh, actually, so I think a better example is like the feast, the so-called Feast of Booths, right? Um, appears to have originally been just like a summer harvest festival. Uh, over time, so it's kind of how it's presented in the book of Exodus. Um, by the time you get to the book of Deuteronomy, you have, and they would erect these huts in order to, again, just for pragmatic purposes. You have to spend a lot of time out in the fields to make sure you get all the harvest in, so you end up building these temporary shelters to ensure that you're there most of the time and you're close by, and these sorts of things, right? Well, the whole rationale for building these temporary shelters changes by the time you get to the book of Deuteronomy, where it says the reason you do this is not for any practical purpose, but because when you had to live in temporary shelters when you were leaving Egypt and wandering in the wilderness, right? So we see this already taking place, where these ritual religious explanations are provided to things that we already just do. Um, I tend to think that's um a a good natural explanation for um why the Israelites eventually came to understand pork as an unclean animal. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, especially when you get into like group identity and
Mhm.
social cohesion, and that's very, very obvious in the Torah and the biblical law. It's like we're not going to be like those people. You will
Exactly.
not be like those people, even though
Exactly.
you're basically using the same laws as those people and doing a lot of the same thing. But you don't do the magic except for when you do the magic. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I should say the divination. But yeah, so let's keep going there. You say in early Iron Age villages consist of groupings of houses together and likely comprised of family units. We identify this way of life in the hill country as kinship-based societies. Can you tell us more about these sizes of these houses? What does it tell us about the hierarchy and blood relation to each other?
Yeah. So, um, the what one of the things that another one of the things that the archaeologists at early on identified as a distinct feature of Israelite culture was something that's called the four room house, or the four zone house, which is like um so it's like a I they're fairly large dwellings. I think they're some of the figures on them, on average, they can, be like 100 meters square, like 10 meters by 10 meters. I think that's about 1,000. That's about 1,000 square feet, right? Um, So, and they're designed in such a way that your agriculture or your smaller animals can actually have spaces inside the house. They have an open courtyard kind of in the center. They'll have like food storage and animal um uh areas like in the bottom, and then probably flat roofs on top of that on a second level, which served as like living spaces for the people who lived there. The size of these houses probably indicates that these were larger family groupings, like they could accommodate a whole bunch of people living in them at once. It also seems to promote this ideal that's presented throughout a lot of the biblical texts for hospitality, for looking after people who are ha- passing through and traveling from one place to the next. You want to make sure you've got lots of room to accommodate um, guests passing through, and the groupings of these houses very often in the villages are appear in groupings of 5, 6, 7, 8, oftentimes in sort of a semicircle, um, around sort of like a center court. So the common interpretation is that these look like they are representative of the ways in which the tribal confederacy of Israel seem to organize themselves in these larger family units. At the base unit of Israelite society was the bait of what we call the house of the father, which was, um, as it sounds, a father who um, had within his household wives and children and slaves, and anybody really who didn't have his own um family or household, his own woman and his own children would be part of this group. But then individual houses of fathers would become connected then to larger groupings that we call the mishpacha. The mishpachot, sorry, is the plural. The clans, or what is often translated in the biblical text as families. These look like they're probably the um the constitution of these highland villages, groupings of houses of fathers together, probably people who were related, who brothers who established their own households in close proximity to one another, under the leadership and the authority of their father or their grandfather, who continued to live together after the patriarch had passed away. So they seem to have been closely knit family groupings constructed around the idea of these large, expansive families, and over time kind of formed the base of a culture and society in much later periods of time, which came to identify themselves in like larger tribal allotments, or even as the people of Israel.
Appreciate that. So I know you go on for like 6-hour videos and stuff like that, but
No,
you still got
not
time for a few
me.
more?
Oh yeah, sure. No,
All
I'm
right,
good.
cool. All right. So, uh, so you just to stress a few things there. So when we talk about the house and the hierarchy, could you maybe just go a little bit more into that? So, um, like for example, Shlomo and Faust Abraham in 2003, they talked about how, unlike the four-room house of the Israelites, the Canaanite Phoenician homes were arranged so that certain rooms could only be reached by passing through others, which created a clear hierarchy of access within the dwelling. So, in other words, um, what does it mean for there to be not a hierarchy in the houses of the Israelites, and
Yeah.
what does that mean socially?
So I think, like, people were very attuned. I think, yeah, there's a very nice couple of reconstructions of what a typically Israelite four-room house looked like. And I should point out too that this identification of these structures as um Israelite is a bit artificial. It they were they probably preceded the Israelites and were used not exclusively. It wasn't their exclusive design, but it is the one that's most closely connected to this group of people. But um the idea in antiquity of how much your spaces also reflects cosmic concerns. You know, I like the way that you contrasted that with like a typical Philistine dwelling, which gave spatial representation to something more hierarchical than this, which tends to promote like an egalitarianism and an openness and, like I said, an emphasis on hospitality and connection to family and to the land and to the uh, to to the agrarian way of living. I think I talk at one point, I think it's in chapter 2 about how, if I can find it here. Uh yeah. Yeah, I think that's this is also um from Abraham Faust, or is that what you were you reading? I don't think it was from my book, was it?
No,
The
I
book
don't know.
there
I
from
can't
no,
remember
no.
where I got that.
So, so he talks about how um these these structures were reflective of like cosmological ideals. I cite them in my own book for anybody who's got it. That's on page 61, where he says that developing in the Iron Age, the functional needs of the hill zone settlers, the building, this four zone house, was adopted in the process of ethnic negotiation and boundary construction, which accompanied the Israelite ethnogenesis and crystallized in the 10th century BCE as part of the renegotiation of this identity. Some of its architectural characteristics, few of them revealed by access analysis, reflect Israelite values and practices. For example, egalitarian ethos, purity practices, privacy, and cosmology. They are reflected in the spatial syntax in the house as well as in the biblical text. Moreover, because Israelites were preoccupied with order, once this kind of house became typical, it eventually became the appropriate and right one. One of the things that's interesting, I can't remember if I point this out in the book or not, is that one of the features of these structures, by and large, tends to be their east facing. The opening on the house is towards the east. Um, this is not just, for the benefit of the morning sunlight, but because there tends to be this fixation on things beginning in the east, things beginning with the dawn, and there's this cosmological concern that's attached to that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that also is really interesting with the focus of the East and Genesis, as well as
That's
how
where
temples are like that as well.
exactly, yeah,
That's really fascinating.
temples too.
All
So
right. You talked about the four-room house a little bit there. In your book, you mentioned the flat roof that functioned in winter to collect rainwater. So that's fun. The
mhm.
top
It's just
is is just to collect water. So that's pretty cool. I like that. And then the ground floor for storage of food preparation, house animals, mostly sheep, goats, and donkeys. Uh, Open the central space of the second floor was open to the sky and accessed by steps or ladder. And something that I recognize after reading your book and reading it a little bit further is that not every single one was exactly like this. So there is
no, no.
variation.
Yeah. Yeah, quite a bit of variation between them, and the yeah, and they do vary in size and composition. So like what this is sort of representative of, I I get like something that you would say is typical, right?
Mhm.
But not exactly the same. And even, this one has like rooms on a second floor. Um, part of the way that the archaeologists will tend to evaluate and reconstruct structures out of ruins like this has to do with judging from the thickness of the walls or something, right? If you've got really thick walls, it's usually an indication that there's supporting multiple stories, right? And
Mm.
and you have steps in place. But there so a number of these were probably did not have like they had a completely open second story, so that may not necessarily have been consistent. You have some neat stories in the Bible too, though, right? About who is it? The wealthy Shunammite woman who entertains the prophet Elisha. Says, she tells her husband that she wants to build like a room, an upstairs room in the house that they have, on the second floor in the living area there, specifically for Elijah whenever he's passing through. On a much grander scale, right? You have David who's walking around on it, literally it says like the roof of his palace. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, I think it is. So, people made use of these exterior spaces, on the roofs of their homes, of their dwellings.
Hmm. Yeah. And um, could you talk about the role that hospitality played in Israel's society? You already talked about a good amount, but
Yeah.
um, maybe for like from a perspective of the survival system
Yeah.
and yeah, get into that.
Sure. So, like, I talk about this a fair bit in the second chapter. Um, one of the and this I think is emphasized too. by the biblical writers as like a sharp distinction between what life is like in the country as opposed to what life is like in the city, right? I mean, you are in danger when you're in the city. If you're not from the city and you happen inside the city from the outside, you're in danger. Um, the the story that not just the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's the other one from Judges uh chapter um or is it? It's like the end of Judges. I'm trying to remember what that is, but you see this pretty sharply contrasted there, right? If I can find it, I'll actually
Judges
read.
19, the Levites
Yeah.
concubine at
Yeah,
Gibeah.
the story of the Levites concubine. Let me see if I can find where I'm talking about that
Now you have to read the whole
in
thing.
my actual book here. Do I have to read the whole thing?
Well,
Uh
you've already taken
we
this
probably
long finding the
don't
book,
have
so
I know. We probably don't have time for any of that, but uh you're such a smart ass.
no,
Yeah, so
no.
here sorry. Um is it yeah, I think I only oh yeah, here it is. So uh, this is my translation of it here, and I'm reading from page 62. Um I'll just read what I have on the page here. Um As we saw in the story of Elisha, it was common for these familial villages to accommodate guests, harsh environmental conditions, and especially away from the high walls of the Canaanite cities, left travelers particularly vulnerable. Passers by and visitors to the village would sit at the village entrance and await invitation from one of the locals. This is viewed as a customary practice, from the perspective of the biblical text. And then we have this story, right, in Judges chapter 19, verse 16 to 21. The opening part of which I find really fascinating, and I'll just read it to you. Again, this is my translation. In the evening, an old man came from his work in the field. This man hailed from the hill country of Ephraim. He resided at Gibeah. The men of the place were sons of Benjamin. So already you've got this um, this ethnographic distinction, this ethnological distinction between them. He happened to see, excuse me, he happened to see a traveler in the open square of the town. Where, the old man inquired, are you going to, and where do you come from? He replied, we are traveling from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim. That is where I live. I made a journey to Bethlehem of Judah, and now I am going to the house of Yahweh, but nobody has taken me into his house. We have both bruised straw and feed for our donkeys, and bread and wine for me and your slave woman, and for the boy with your slaves. We lack nothing. Rest easy, said the old man. Let all your needs be on my account, but do not stay in the square. So he brought him to his house. He mixed fodder for his donkeys, then washed his feet and ate and drank. So I go on to say, I'll just read this last paragraph here. This is the story about a man, a Levite living in the far north in Ephraim, who traveled some distance to the south to the tribe of Benjamin, arriving in a town in the late evening. This takes place in one of these small highland villages on the frontier, away, we are told, from the house of Yahweh. The old man, also from Ephraim, fulfills his ethical obligation to care for this stranger. At the end of his daily work, he's intentional about ensuring that the outsider in the village square is accommodated. We continue to read in this passage of how he brought him back to his home, shared his food with him, gave provisions for his animals, and a bed under his own roof for the night. The old man's ominous warning about staying in the square reveals that the stakes for the stranger are a matter of mortal concern. And you see that reflected then also in the parallel story, right, of Sodom and Gomorrah. the two angels that that nobody knows are angels show up in Sodom in the city square, and it's Lot who's alarmed at the fact that they have no place to stay. They're like, "No, thanks, we'll just stay here." And he insists, right? No, 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 you can't. You have to come back to me because it's dangerous. It's dangerous to stay in the city square. You can't do that. You're liable to get yourself, assaulted or murdered. Who knows what could happen to you if you stay in the square. So there's this heightened concern. I think there's a reflection of just the fact that life for travelers is difficult and it's dangerous. It's dangerous to go from one place to the next. There was no police forces. There was no, standing army looking after the safety of individuals. If you were out away from the cities, you were vulnerable to, brigands or robbers or you know people who wanted to take advantage of you, and there was no civil authority to protect you in those instances. So you really were taking your life into your own hands when you went traveling. Um, these highland villages, in a way, kind of they're this strong ethic of hospitality that weaves its way throughout numerous of the biblical texts, the laws. Uh, this reflects, I think, just this recognition that life out in the hinterland is really, really difficult. Life in the cities is dangerous. Life in the hinterland is challenging. And if you don't have a place to rest when you're out and about, you're very likely to die. So it's this is what we see, I think, at the heart of this strong ethic. Um, there's other things that come out of this as well. I don't know how much I talk about it in the book, but one of the things that I really like to feature in the ways in which the village culture sort of contrasted with the city culture is in how there seems to be a celebration in the stories of the patriarchs, but especially Jacob, for getting one over and for besting people who are more powerful than you or who are in positions of higher influence than you. Jacob's name literally means trickster, right? He's tricky Jacob. And this isn't, I don't think, at the heart of it, uh this isn't a criticism. This is a virtue. Jacob is resourceful. Jacob is able to use his wits and his cunning and his cleverness to not just survive but thrive. This is part of like this highland ethic where you have to depend on your own wits, and sometimes it means that the one who's able to take advantage of somebody who might not be as savvy as you is celebrated and rewarded. So yeah,
That's really
look,
fun topic there, the trickster idea,
yeah.
because one might say that Jacob is lying, but then you have the Hebrew midwives, and then you have Rahab, and there's a whole bunch of other instances in the Hebrew Bible where lying
Well,
is
this
seen as a good thing.
yeah, and even like I don't know, the stories. Some of the stories of Jacob. in his competition with his father-in-law Laban. Or I mean, they're kind of fun in the way in which this relationship that Jacob has with his father-in-law seems to be built on this element of, you know, getting the advantage over the other one in like this in a competitive way. Um, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that is fun. So, uh, looking into it, I'm not going to say this with any kind of certainty, but I read that uh, guests could bring honor, so the host status increases, the household reputation spreads, the host
yes,
becomes known as safe and righteous.
yeah.
Honor creates alliances. Alliances create protection. Protection means survival. And then you also have guests bringing in information, which could be helpful for survival if there's like impending doom outside the village or something like that.
Yeah.
And then guests also create reciprocal obligations. So once you host someone, you have an ally, a friend, and a future defender. So a lot of uh,
I like the way
w-
I finished the chapter with a quote from Don Benjamin. I like the way that he puts it. He says, "Hospitality is the act of keeping strangers alive. Hosts feed and protect their guests, and in return, guests feed and protect their hosts." So there's very much like it's very much built on, as you said, there's these elements that you point out of this kind of symbiotic relationship where you know, by promoting hospitality in your own homes, in your own
Mhm,
lives within this culture, you are also enriching yourself.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. So that really leads us to kind of what the title of this video is discussing, where scholars suggest that the social practices such as hospitality, combined with a decentralized kinship-based village structure, enabled Israel to expand and survive, while the great empires and city-states of the region were wiped out. So, could you maybe bring all that together, or just talk more about that?
Yeah. Um so it's really, you know, it's a product. I would say it's in many ways it's a product of necessity. The new like the new world order, the way in which the world shifted in terms of you know, the demographics and the social structure and stratification and the economics, the way these things shifted sort of pushed these people who would become Israelites into this place where they had to make these adaptations, and they had to um, uh, basically prioritize these things like their familial bonds and their this ethic of hospitality as a means of ensuring that they would surpass and survive in this period when the imperial powers crumbled. So I think it's I think I can probably pull something else up here from uh Christian Frevel. I really like this book by Christian Frevel. Um where see if I can find it. Uh what he says here in summary. Um Sorry, I didn't have this ready beforehand.
Never again.
Oh, I know. It's terrible, right? Uh yeah, sorry, I can't find it offhand. Whoops.
You'll just have to
I
read
should
the
never
book.
promise and not deliver. Yeah, you should read the book. It's a very good book. That is, um, it's just called History of Ancient Israel. It's in archaeology and biblical studies, and it
Well, I was
was
gonna say
published
read your book because
in
you were quoting,
2023. Oh, yes, read my book too.
and
Uh,
then you can get the quote.
that
Perfect.
that's right. It's actually the Frevel quote I was looking for is not one that I actually used in the book, but
Oh
I
my
do
gosh.
draw a fair bit. I know, I
Never
know.
mind. Don't get
I
the
do
book, everybody. It's
draw.
it's a waste.
Get the audiobook. That's fun.
Yeah.
So I've
Yeah.
been told.
Yeah. But more to what you were saying there is that so it gave the Israelites and fellow Canaanites mobility, resilience in a time of regional collapse.
Yeah,
These small scattered villages were hard for external powers to control or destroy, and it gave them distinct practices, which is really interesting from a psychological perspective. For example, avoiding pork that
yeah.
reinforced these group boundaries, making communities more cohesive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Things like yeah, that and the festivals and even the tribal allotments, right? Like tribal identity. It's one of these things where it was grounded on this idea of families. We're all closely connected to one another, but in practical concerns, as this culture developed into what we understand to be Israel, more than likely, this idea of tribal affiliation and confederacy was probably based mostly on like geographical and environmental proximity more so than family, but came to the point where people would just start to identify as members of a particular tribe or a particular smaller ethnic group, even if they didn't have those familial sorts of relations. It's fascinating. One of the things that we see this in the Amarna letters, right? Where um in emphasizing their alliances with one another, kings in i- i- kings of these individual city states, but we see it in in the correspondences between the rulers in Egypt and those in the Hittite Empire would actually go so they would not just call one another brother, but you even have preserved portions where one will say to the other, "I call you brother because I know that you and I actually descend from the same mother." Even though we know that to be historically actually not true, it's something that, they represent to each other as a way of reinforcing this, economic cultural tie that they have to one another, right? Um, the tribal allotments, I think, in many respects, function in the same way, even though they were based on actual families. Over time, as they got bigger, they came to comprise all sorts of people who just identified with one another on, a variety of bases. And came to understand themselves as family, even if they didn't have these strict biological connections.
Hmm. Really fascinating. Awesome. Well, as I said before, everybody should go check out the book. Really interesting. Even if you're a Christian, you can get a
Thanks.
lot out of it.
Even
And
if you're a Christian.
even if you're a super hater of Kip, you can also get something out of it
Hey,
too.
listen, I think I said in the beginning, I didn't write the book. It's not a book for Christians or for atheists or
mhm,
for Jewish people or for anybody of any particular religious or non-religious affiliation. I actually
mhm.
wrote the book for people who love the Bible, as I do. I won't say it because I don't want you to get in trouble, but I have a particularly strong, affinity for the Bible. I find it a fascinating text, and if you are interested in gaining a deeper understanding of the Bible within its cultural context, its religious and political context, if you want to gain a better understanding of how these texts and why they developed the way they did over time, I would say that that's really who the book was written for. And I think if that's you, you'll appreciate some of the stuff that's in there.
Awesome. And concluding thoughts, this guy, Digital Hammurabi says, "Oh, good grief, this guy. Does he even speak the Paleo Hebrew?"
I don't even speak pre-Yiddish
Huh.
or no or reformed Egyptian
Huh.
at all. I don't speak any of those things,
Okay.
including I don't speak Paleo Hebrew.
Wow.
Um
Maybe you
but
should have told me this in advance before
I
tonight.
probably should have. I wonder if Josh is offering a course in Paleo Hebrew.
Yeah.
He seems to wow. I don't even
Thanks.
know. I don't even know who Jenna Sequa is.
I don't either.
That's
Maybe one day.
this is
And
yeah.
Icy Pirate says, "Kip, something. It could be anything. Loves the
It
Bible."
could be anything.
Yeah.
Anything at all.
And
He's
he's got
just
a
reading the
nice
t-shirt
right. Yeah.
that's in the
And you can get
background
that
there.
shirt if you want to. If you want to tell all your fellow Christians that you love the
That's
Bible as
that's
well.
the that's the church version. I have a non-church version as
Oh,
well.
okay. All
So,
right. That makes sense. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Any last
You
thoughts?
bet. Any last thoughts? I I don't no, I don't think so, except that I just really like your channel. Um and I appreciate that you are working hard to provide like a really broad picture of biblical scholarship for people. Um and I love coming here. In large part because of that, because I think you do a really good job at
Oh,
at presenting that for the general public.
awesome.
So
Well,
way to
thanks,
go.
friend. Thanks. I think
You
you did a
bet.
good job too.
Oh,
But
thanks.
awesome. Everybody, make sure to like and subscribe to Kip. Make sure you like and subscribe to my
Oh,
channel. If you,
can I
yeah,
just say
sure.
I got some things coming up if I could. I stream, if people don't know, I stream on every Thursday night at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific, where I do a 1 hour Hebrew reading stream. So if you're into reading Hebrew or hearing people read Hebrew, come and check that out. That'll be fun. I have a special guest that rotates every week. And tomorrow, Jordan Jones from Bible and Archaeology will be joining
Sweet.
me. And then on Friday, I do a live stream every Friday at 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock Pacific. And this week, I'm going to be talking about the story of David and Goliath. As you
Mm,
may or may not know, there's some controversy as to who actually killed Goliath. So we will be diving into that and talking about how the story of David and Goliath functions in this as a royal propaganda piece for the House of David. And then on Saturdays at 2 o'clock Pacific, sorry, 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, I have a regular appearance on Dapper Dinosaurs channel, Dapper Reacts, and on Saturday night at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific, I do a bi-weekly show on my channel called Budget Scripture Saturdays, which was inspired by my friend Maya Adkisson's show, uh, Bad Science Sundays. I even stole her co-host. So, Dr. Tapioca Weasel is one of my co-hosts, along with Nitty, who I saw in the chat here earlier,
hmm.
and we sit around on Saturday night and watch really, really bad videos about the Bible and have a lot of fun laughing about them. It's a good time. So that's what I've got going on.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, everybody check that out. Kipp's clearly very busy. So you got to love
Very.
that. Awesome. So thank you so much, guys. Like and
Thanks, man.
subscribe. Have a good one.